and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. Friends, it's good to be with you again this week. I'm sorry that we have been off the last couple of weeks for recording. We had CIVICS CON, and then both Emily and I have been traveling for work for our respective jobs. In fact, I am recording this from a tiny Airbnb in Washington, D.C. I am here attending the America Votes State Summit. There's my name tag if you are watching this on video. It's been an incredible week to be here with colleagues from across the country doing similar work. Last night we had a really great reception with our colleagues in Kansas who run the Kansas Civic Engagement Table called the Voter Network. They are valuable partners in this work, and it's just good to know that people here in the middle of the country are still out there beating the drum of civic engagement. I talked to one of the leaders from their legislature. I met with someone from doing work in North Dakota. Of course, places like Virginia and Ohio and Montana and everywhere else in between. It's good. There's an optimism that I don't think I've felt nationally in a while. And that's encouraging. But that also means that we haven't had a chance to record a regular podcast for you. And so today's episode is the recording from CIVICS CON of Joe Kennedy giving his keynote speech at CIVICS CON 2 weeks ago. It's great. It's about 15-20 minutes long, and then of him speaking, and then he does a Q&A. And I apologize. We had him mic'd up to record. We obviously didn't mic up the whole audience. And so you probably won't be able to hear some of the questions, but you will hear his response. And he tried to reflect back the question as best he could. Should be really great. I hope you enjoy it. And then next week, Emily and I should be back with a regular episode, perhaps about the end of the legislative session. That's right. It's not even May yet, and we're already talking about the end. They could adjourn as early as today, although I think most people are expecting it to be sometime towards the middle or end of next week. So we'll have a recap at whatever point we are in the session by then. There's a lot of measures that are going to end up on the August ballot. If you haven't seen the news this week, we will make sure that you have all the information you need, because it's an all hands on deck situation, right? This is going to be a really big deal for the future of Medicaid, for Sooner Care in our state, which they are opening the door to defund, and a bunch of other issues, property tax and a bunch of other stuff that really is flying under the radar because it's kind of wonky, and they're putting it on a very low turnout ballot, which is, suffice to say, not okay as far as I'm concerned, and maybe democracy is concerned. But we'll come back to that next week. For now, please enjoy Joe Kennedy.
To everybody here today, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sticking around through lunch. It might have been free lunch rather than me that got you here, but nevertheless, I am grateful that you are here. I have had the privilege of spending some time around Oklahoma over the course of the past couple of years, and truly it has been an absolute pleasure. The people, the work, the food. This place is something special. And I hope you all feel the same way about Boston, particularly in 2 weeks when we come back and crush your hopes and dreams with that NBA title. I've done that for the past 2 days. It works every time, right? It works every time. So thank you again for having me. Gatherings like this, and communities like this, and spaces like this, it's where democracy lives. It's a hard, messy daily work of building community, holding power to account, and showing up for a neighbor. And that's really why I wanted to be here today. Because when people ask, how you doing these days, I usually give some version of the answer, other than a broken country and a crazy president, we're fine. It's hard to know how to fix everything before more damage is done. Where after all of this time, we still find ourselves asking the same basic question. What actually is democracy? Is it something that happens to people? Or is it something that you do? Well, I think Oklahoma actually gives a pretty good answer. Your history is filled with stories about the doing that makes democracy real. First, an obvious example, perhaps, is Greenwood, Black Wall Street. A thriving community, center of Black entrepreneurship, of culture, of success, built from the ground up by people who believed in the promise of this country, even when that promise wasn't extended to them. And then destroyed, burned, and erased by in one of the most horrific acts of racial violence in American history. And now, the work of commemorating, of preserving, of reclaiming a legacy that they tried to erase. It's the story of American democracy, about the ongoing work of trying to keep promises that have been made, the act of picking up pieces, of putting one foot in front of the other, of doing the next right thing in moments where the horizon feels shrouded in darkness, and the refusal to accept a painful chapter as the end of our story. Then there's Clara Luper. She didn't ask for permission or wait for change from Washington. She sat at that lunch counter for days, through the ugliness spewed by bigotry, responding when confronted with dignity and grace. She knew that she was enough. She organized where she was with who she had. She created a spark that changed our country. This is the tradition that you all inherit, the legacy that brings us here today. When there is no question that we are facing a uniquely difficult moment for our democratic values and the ones that we hold most dear. But we didn't get here by accident or some fluke. You all know this better than most. For decades, anti-democratic forces have been organizing in places like Oklahoma, across the Deep South, across Appalachia, the Plains, building power patiently, consistently, locally. They invested strategically in state and local officials, in school boards and state legislatures, in courts. They built networks of influence that don't turn on and off every 2 years or 4 years or with an election cycle, but they operate every single day, even if there isn't an immediate election to win. Meanwhile, too many on the national stage who believe in justice and equity and democracy have decided that some places were just too tough, too hard, too distant, too far gone to bother showing up. So the opposition's success has been devastating for all of us. Gutting key protections from the Voting Rights Act and opening the door to a wave of voter suppression across the entire nation. Rolling back bodily autonomy some 50 years under the guise of states' rights. Weakening the ability of federal agencies to protect workers and consumers and the environment. Taking power away from the public and giving it to those with the most resources and influence. We know that power abhors a vacuum. Someone, something will fill it. And that is why we created Groundwork Project. It's at Groundwork, we believe in something simple, but fundamental. That real power has to be rooted in the communities that it serves. That you can't build from a distance. You do it by investing directly in the people doing the work, on the ground, day after day. Local organizers, and community leaders, and trusted voices. We invest in people who aren't showing up because there's a campaign, but because it's their home. And it's their home 365 days a year. At Groundwork, we say that we show up in the real battlegrounds. The fight isn't over one candidate or one election, but over the future of democracy itself. The work isn't flashy. It's not what you see in breaking news headline, and it does not produce overnight wins, although we wish it did. It's about building, day in and day out. About earning trust. About creating relationships that last. Patient, incremental victories that have always been the pulse and promise of what democracy really is. And here in Oklahoma, that fight is very, very real. That opposition is real too. And the wins are real too. Every day, we at Groundwork are blown away by the organizations that we are proud to support. Organizations that show up, that do the work even when, and especially when, it is really hard. Folks like the Oklahoma Parents Legislative Action Committee, taking case on separation of church and state all the way up to the Supreme Court and winning. The Foundation for Liberating Minds, right over there, serving breakfast to their East Side neighbors to build up community and build up each other. The Red Dirt Collective in Norman, running both community gardens and ICE response trainings. Rock the Native Vote, lifting up voices to ensure conversations about tribal IDs and access to the ballot box are not ignored. The Julius Jones Institute, continuing their push for justice and accountability in a system that too often resists both. Freedom Oklahoma, creating space for every young person to lead with dignity and freedom from fear. Action in Tulsa, delivering over 650 letters to the governor from community members concerned about immigration enforcement in their communities. And of course, Let's Fix This, bring people together in spaces like this one to turn frustration into action. Oklahoma, you guys do this work so well. It's a tradition that you share with folks in the nooks and crannies across our country, in the hollers and homes around our nation, and the other places that Groundwork is proud to show up. In Mississippi, where organizers are defending the rights of low-wage workers across the Mississippi Delta. In West Virginia, where partners are standing up to out-of-state private equity firms that are raising rents in mobile home parks. In Alabama, where communities are fighting to draw fairer maps and organizing in newly drawn districts. Different places, yes. Different challenges, perhaps. Same principle. Democracy is something we do. But we also have to be honest about what that actually asks of people. Because showing up, of course, sounds simple, but it's not. Not when your history is banned from classrooms. Not when systems are designed to keep you out. Not when your vote is suppressed, your identity denied, your funding cut off. Not when your community has literally been burned to the ground. In those moments, showing up isn't participation. It's courage. It's sacrifice. It's Clara Luper at a lunch counter for 3 days, studying while she waits, because she was going to make the most of that time. It's organizers knocking on doors that may never open. It's the tough conversations with family and friends about the need for change. It's community leaders holding and building something from nothing, again and again and again. And it's all of you doing this work. For far too long, you've been grinding away in a struggle to push our country to live up to promises. It denied resources that could make that fight a little easier. You've been told that we'll get to you just as soon as we win that other race. It's a swing seat, it's a swing state, it's a battleground. It's essential to count to 270. You understand. We'll get back to you at some point, but keep up the good work. National parties, national organizations, national donors, they show up when it's convenient, and they left when it wasn't. But you all didn't. You stayed. You keep showing up. And that's why this moment, as difficult as it is also one of unique possibility. Everyone here feels that this is different. We aren't on the edge of change, but we are in it right now. We need each and every one of you. Because your future is too precious to leave it to somebody else to write. Oklahoma knows what happens when someone tries to take that pen from you. You know what it takes to keep on trying, to take care of each other, to build something together. That wisdom and steadiness, and faith and grit is how America claws its way back to decency and grace. And it lives here in rooms like this. In Oklahoma, in the South and across the plains, in Appalachia, and every other community that knows what it means to fight for its place. From the ashes of Greenwood to the lunch counters of Oklahoma City, to courtrooms and community centers and classrooms across the state. Oklahoma, you have shown over and over again that democracy doesn't survive because of grand speeches or sweeping moments. It survives because ordinary people are doing extraordinary work. Work like that of the Alpha Community Foundation, which hosted our Groundwork partners just yesterday. They've acquired the Garden Oaks Elementary School, which had closed, and are transforming it into an extraordinary asset in community space. Freedom Oklahoma, as I mentioned, is one of our partners. They do work to build an Oklahoma where all 2S LGBTQ plus people have safety, community, and resources that they need to thrive. Few other members of our community have been as deliberately targeted, exploited, and harmed as those that Freedom Oklahoma seeks to protect. And yet, as we were leaving the community center yesterday, Cole, who runs the organization, slipped me a little something. And it was a sticker. That sticker. And it reads, "Oklahoma is worth the work." Yes, you are. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for what you do.
You can stay there.
Great.
Joe offered to spend a few minutes fielding questions from the audience. Don't embarrass me. But I'm going to run around the microphone if anyone has a question.
Celtics in 6 is the answer to your first question. It was like, it's going so well. Huh? Oh, man. It's the guy in the back. God. Brutal.
I've been to Boston Garden, and I've been to, so Thunder's going to win. So my question is, how do you see the differences across the country, thinking about the U.S. at like 250 years, how have the dynamics changed? I'm old enough to remember when President Kennedy, before he was president, came to Wheeling, West Virginia, West Virginia. So I wonder, from your perspective, from being from Massachusetts as you travel the country, how have you seen the dynamics change in what we now call blue and red states?
What's your name, sir?
Jim.
So look, I think the question was kind of how have I seen dynamics change perspective of a blue state guy. So I think two different levels to that question, right? On the one hand, like we are a fundamentally different place, and our political system is a fundamentally different place today than it was 10 years ago, right? Just sea change. And there's a lot of factors to that: rural-urban migration, economic trends, immigration trends, the impact of social media, of sclerosis of government, all of these factors that lead to the pulling apart of kind of community and community fabric. The flip side is also true that like politics at its core, it's about people. And it's about people meeting people and building a relationship to try to address challenges that confront a community. My predecessor in office had the best definition of government I ever heard, which was government simply the name we give to the things we do together. Right? It's people sitting around a table trying to solve a problem. Families do it every day, right? Every day. And that's what it is. It's people sitting around a table trying to solve a problem. And so, you know, best advice I ever got was in my first race, one of my first events, kind of an old guard family member. I was terrified. He did did a big event for me in Washington, D.C., and I was like, I thought my campaign was over after the first day because I was like shaking. I was so scared to like flop on my face in front of these kind of titans of government. And I survived. Like event didn't end my campaign. And I'm about to go run on the plane. I'm going to catch a plane, and a host pulled me over to the side and I said, "Sir, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your help." He said, "Shut up." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Listen, you did all right tonight." I said, "Thank you so much." He said, "I told you to shut up." I was like, "All right, fine." Jeez, all right. He goes, "Tonight went fine, but at some point the sky is going to fall. In a campaign, it always does. And when you have no idea what else to do, right, do one thing. Go knock on a door. Go knock on 100 doors in a day. Tell them who you are and ask how you can help. And if any of you have knocked on a door, you're going to get chased off a porch. People are going to scream at you. People are going to tell you that like, I don't want to talk, or whatever else. But if you keep doing it and you ask, you will find out what you need to do to right the ship. It's the best advice I ever got. Because when push comes to shove, whether you're talking about social media or ad campaigns or whatever else, it is about a candidate trying to make a connection with a person and trying to convince that person that they understand their community, their needs, their desires, their challenges, and that we can use the powers of government to help. And that hasn't changed. And so what do we need to do? We need to adapt what hasn't changed to fit what has. The last thing I'll say is I have been a consistent, and I think perhaps ever louder voice over the course of the past several years to the greater powers that be in a Democratic Party world, elected and unelected, to say that if you really want to know how to right this ship, if you believe that a Democratic Party has lost its way, that we don't know where that grounding actually is, going back to the people that have stood by your side in your base communities through thick and thin and asking them what's gone wrong, as loyal and as important as those folks are, they're not going to give you the answer because they're still with you. The places where you need to go are the places that you haven't been, and the places that were with you but now aren't. So that when we say renewable energy and you hear job loss, like, okay, well, let's unpack that. Right? When we say dignity and you think, boys playing girls sports, let's unpack that. Like, let's actually get into what it is that is affecting your community and ours to see how we can actually frame these issues and talk about them and have a real conversation with voices that you trust from your community because they are proximate. They're not some guy from Boston coming in and telling you something else. They're a neighbor, they're a principal, they're a pastor, and you know them, and it's their home too. And the best thing a democratic world can do at the moment is find those people and support them such that they can spread and channel that message back. And I don't think we've done a very good job of that. Thank you, Jim. Just shout it out if you want, I can repeat it. No.
So I am a precinct officer for the Democratic Party in Potawatomi County. And
Where's that?
Shawnee.
Okay.
Down I-40.
And you got a name?
Scott.
Scott. Great. Nice to meet you.
So in my experience, knocking on doors and talking to people within my community, Oklahoma voters are so disenfranchised with the Democratic Party and just politics as a whole. What do you think is the next step to get people to vote in Oklahoma? Because we do have one of the lowest voter turnouts in the country.
I think you've got the lowest voter turnout in the country. I think it was Andy that 4 million people, 3 million eligible voters, 2 million registered voters, 1 million voters, right? 4, 3, 2, 1, more or less. So look, I got this question earlier. I'll give probably the same answer. I don't know if it's a good one, so come back at me if you think if it's not. It was framed to me before as like, hey, sometimes people don't know about an election, but probably most people knew there's a presidential election, and the voter turnout was 53%. So like, what gives? And my gut on that is to say that a big part of that is a lack of agency. People just don't feel like either voting in a state like Oklahoma, where chances are it was going to go red. It actually just doesn't really matter, and so why bother voting? Or they might say, hey, there's no difference between the parties, which I get that response sometimes. I'm like, you're insane if you don't think there's a difference between the parties at the moment. I'm sorry, that ain't the case, right? And if it's, hey, you don't like either side, okay, fine. But part of our job in this is to say, look, framing that solely as a vote for president is one thing. There are dozens of other candidates and ballot questions and local issues on that ballot too. And for many of you, the impact of those are going to be just as important as who wins, under normal circumstances, who wins that presidential race. this past one perhaps notwithstanding. But for most, those local impacts, school boards, tax overrides, civic ballot petitions, right? I mean, you guys took Medicaid expansion by ballot initiative. You did criminal justice reform by ballot initiative. Medical marijuana, decriminalization of marijuana by ballot initiative. These civics petitions are hugely consequential. And so part of that is, like, the onus, unfortunately, is on us, neighbor to neighbor, to say, look, you don't think your voice matters because you're thinking about the state might vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. Fine. There's dozens of other races down here. Beto O'Rourke is a good buddy of mine. We came into Congress together. The number of judges that won in Harris County in Texas because he was on that ballot against Ted Cruz all those years ago, it was a sea change in elected officials across Texas and across Greater Houston area because of what happened, even though he lost, because of what happened and what he carried forward. And once those folks are in office, the build that comes from that, if Texas is able to, which we might, actually put in a Democratic senator this time, a big part of that is going to be the coattails of those other races and the people that won, and then the communication that they go through, and the organizations that they have to build, and the volunteer lists, and everything else that builds from that. And so the hard part is having that 4-minute conversation with somebody on your block that just doesn't actually want to have the conversation and thought they could get out of it by saying, hey, the vote doesn't matter. It's like they're wrong. But it's going to take us the persistence to be able to say, you might vote for Donald Trump. We wish you didn't. But there's 15 other things down here that you and I actually agree on about, like, you might like him, but like, what about the quality of our kids' school? You got to get down to that one too. And if you sit this one out, we might not get there. So we got to be respectful, but relentless about the fact that, hey, there's more than one person on the ballot here, and make that case. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Biahe. I just have one question. Given that gerrymandering and partisanship has hindered the unification of the American people, how would you, not as a politician, but as a citizen, what would you suggest for the American people to be more unified after we were disenfranchised?
So, with apologies, because the gerrymander is a Massachusetts export. We started it. Sorry. Yeah, you're welcome. That one was a bummer. So look, I think in terms of like the civic democracy reforms, there's a bunch of them that I think help, and there's no silver bullet to this. Like, there's nothing that just protects everything on the margins, right? Or there's no one reform that is going to solve this problem. And one of the bigger ones we're facing at the moment is the polarization spurned by social media and the impact that is having because of the spread of disinformation, and just what is fact and truth for you is no longer fact and truth for me. And like, that becomes hard to exercise in democracy. That being said, we are also just seeing some recent court cases that might actually hold some of these tech companies to account and actually put in limitations on some of this, which again, we'll see where this goes. You're also starting to see states act individually to start to ban like cell phones in schools, right? So at the very least, younger folks perhaps having less access to being inundated by social media forces going down a rabbit hole, maybe some of this, you can start to patch this back together. I do think, I was with the mayor earlier today, and again, this isn't a silver bullet and it gets complicated, but I think one thing that is worth discussing and entertaining are some of these civic voter system reforms, one of which that is gaining some traction around the country. But again, like, there's complexities to this, is going into shifting to top two voter runoff, so nonpartisan or all-party primaries, as the case may be. Again, there's complexity to this, and I don't want to minimize that complexity. But when part of the challenge at this point is in places like Oklahoma that are, tilt red, might be tilting strongly red, doesn't vote, but when it votes, tilts red because the more red folks vote than don't. But if you can open that aperture to say, hey, rather than just having, as you have now, Republican gubernatorial candidates competing for Republican primary voters, to then get to a runoff, to then have a runoff between who can mobilize the most active Republican primary voters, to have that person then win and then go up against a Democratic nominee, in a red-leaning state, like you're going to get a much more extreme Republican than if you had one that was competing against or could court several 100,000 voters that are left of center, or excuse me, slightly right of center, that don't actually want a MAGA extremist, but actually want somebody that is going to make sure that the state functions. And so if you create the incentive to actually speak to more voters and actually address more, like I do think the population is more in a bell curve of like, there's a silent middle there that just wants things to work, right? They're busy raising kids, they're busy going to work, they're busy taking care of things. Like this stuff kind of matters, but like what matters most is like, are my kids safe and healthy in a good school? So like, give me that answer rather than like litmus tests out the wazoo on this thing or that thing. Just take care of that. The system is not incentivized to permit elected officials to essentially candidates to run to speak to that. And so there's reforms that have to, now there's complexities to that, like to that reform that have to be, accounted for as well. But that is one that I think is worth looking at and judging state by state as to whether that's could be part of a solution.
We've got time for one more.
We'll take two. We got two.
Okay, two more. Vicki, were you the other hand?
I did. Hello, my name is Kimberly.
Hi.
So regarding Groundwork Project, I know you talk about the boom and bust campaigns. How do you guys keep that interest with the grassroots for the long term, not just before the hot button issues or the big votes? You've got to have a plan for that. How do you keep the grassroots and the interest going consistently?
Because, ma'am, the way that we frame this is like the issue about are there workers across the Mississippi Delta that are being exploited by poultry farms and catfish factory farms that are not actually making good on wage and hour laws and are gypping them? Like that doesn't end on the Wednesday after the Tuesday after the Monday of November. Like that happens every year. So like supporting the legal team that can go out there, find those plaintiffs, sue those employers, hold them to account, like that's a 24/7, 365 thing. That doesn't end. When you have an organization in the STEPS Coalition that is in Biloxi, in Gulfport, I mean, you guys know a story like this. You might not know this specific one. Hurricane Katrina wiped out not just New Orleans Gulf Coast, but it wiped out the Biloxi area almost as bad, if not worse, candidly, than it hit New Orleans. A huge swath of the affordable housing stock went underwater, got washed away. Congress appropriated a couple, I think over $100 million to go back to rebuild the affordable housing stock. You know what happened to it? Went to a defense contractor to build up a Navy base. Yeah, right? So a bunch of local organizations got together and formed the STEPS Coalition to actually advocate for affordable housing and economic development, environmental preservation around Biloxi and the Gulf Coast. That stuff doesn't end after, it's been well over a decade. They're still there. Why? Because the community still need it. So when you frame this over community need, that doesn't end. When you frame it around community engagement and community activism around, yes, a policy outcome, but the fact is that even if you address one policy, even if they were able to get that $100 million back to start building, that doesn't end all of the rest of the injustice and discrimination and all of the horrible stuff that's happening to those communities across the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. There's plenty of other stuff that's going to keep them busy. But the ability to bring that community together and provide them the resources to increase that connectivity is going to increase their political power to be able to hold that system to account. So where we frame this is not to say, hey, well, the ultimate goal here might be a policy change or an investment of, a government investment. It's not going to end even when that happens. And as we've seen, I mean, some of you, we were talking earlier about the Alabama solution, the documentary, right? There was a huge push during COVID for COVID relief funds. And, a huge investment that was made across the country to try to make sure that communities were able to survive through it. Some of you that have seen that movie, what did Alabama do with $1 billion of unspent money? Put it to go build a prison. So even if you thought there and said, hey, we won because we appropriated money to do this, they were like, thanks very much, we're going to go build a supermax prison that then, after we lock more people up, we can put them to work and profit off of their work because Alabama still, there's an exception to the prohibition of slavery in our Constitution so that that amendment does not apply if you are incarcerated. So they can still get paid $1 a day and have the rest of that profit go to a contractor working through that prison. So like, even if you got the money, even if you did this, it doesn't end. And so what we try to do is invest in those folks that are framing this not as a policy solution, but as a way to continue to grow community. I said one more, sorry, Andy. You got one, yeah.
I don't know if you're gonna wanna hear this.
Why not?
I come from a journalism background, I'm still in freedom of speech. I've been charged with asking, what do you think of RFK Jr.?
You're right about that. No hablo inglés, I think is the. Look, I think in all seriousness, I would say, and I speak for me personally. I don't speak for any other member of my family. I don't speak for anybody else. It's been hard, right? And it's been, I think Bobby is doing. I'm sure Bobby is doing what he thinks is right. I assume that there's some things that Bobby is doing that I agree with. There's a lot of things that I don't. This part has been very, very difficult for me, and I'm sure others. But I hope. I think part of the challenge that we confront at this moment, and that a democratic world, big D democratic world, hasn't done so well is, we haven't been quite as humble as we probably need to be about like the fact that, even if we think the science is right, some things messages were inconsistent, or messages turned out not to be wholly accurate, and like things evolved in a pandemic. Wear masks, don't wear masks, should wear masks, shouldn't wear masks. Like, it was a fast and furious time, and people were trying to figure stuff out, and like we didn't get everything right. And so acknowledging the fact that when you're trying to talk to communities about like what they need to do or how to best protect themselves, even if it's coming from the best place, if you get that wrong, there's going to be consequences to that. And a trust is going to be broken. And so what I take from this moment, whether it's what I see coming out of HHS or plenty of other aspects of this administration, is individuals and an administration taking advantage of that ruptured trust. And part of the reason why I do believe that groundwork is such an important piece to this is, even if tomorrow you said you could appoint an entirely new cabinet and you had a different president of the United States, even if we did that, that doesn't solve the fact that a whole lot of people aren't going to trust what the smartest, best intentioned, evidence-based practices are going to say is going to make our country stronger, healthier, more resilient, and better. We need that change through the administration and through government. We need to empower influence, I'd say influencers, but just trusted people that actually, doctors at community health centers, local leaders that can translate, what is going on down to community members. And then like our work is going to be to link, you get the leadership right up here, you find the folks that actually have the trust down here, and then you got to link them. And we can't do this yet. We can do this, and we can figure out how we can best create those linkages when we have the chance to put the right people in place that we think are going to give, better advice about what it is that we all want, which is safe, healthy, resilient, and vibrant communities where kids are going to be safe and families are safe. And there's, I got 2 little kids, right? Like, there is the one thing I am certain of across humanity, is that there's nothing a parent won't do for a child. So when you try to come at this and say, hey, evidence is like, if you're trying to get between a parent and child, it's because the parent has to trust that whoever's in between them is going to do a better job caring for them than they would. There's an expertise there that they have, that a doctor has, that somebody else has, that I don't. I trust that medicine because of my own background and experience, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. We're in a fortunate place. I know dozens and dozens of doctors. I trust them. They're good friends of mine. If you're not in that same environment, do you? Maybe don't. We have to rebuild that, and we don't have to wait for that change to happen. We need to be doing that now, because we can't afford, when there is a change, we can't afford to let any kid fall through those cracks. So, thanks, everybody.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks again to Joe Kennedy and the Groundwork Project for being amazing partners in this work. If you would like to be a partner as well, we need your help. We're going to be doing a lot of voter registration and education and outreach over the next several months, and we need every Oklahoman possibly can to kind of tap in and join in this work with us. If you haven't signed up already, please go to our website, letsfixthis.org, and sign up. We'll get you on the list, in the hopper, to help us do some of this work. I promise we won't spam you. I don't have time to write that many emails. But as we say every week, decisions are made by those who show up. We need you to show up with us. Have a great week.